We'll shoot straight into it, shall we? It's a film you co-wrote, you've produced it, but it's your first one as a director. So, can we talk about the origin of the film first? How it sort of started, how long ago? Because you've been in the business for a little while, and just how it got off the ground, really.
Okay, this project had been in gestation for about 5-6 years. And then about 3 years ago, finally, I decided that kind of like my career trajectory reached a point. I'd written some scripts before, written stories for movies that became, quite successful. I produced many, and I kind of reached a point and said, okay, I've done it all. I should direct a movie. And it wasn't like so much just itch to direct. It was more like, I want to tell a story all the way to the end, the way I think it should be told. Because as a writer and producer, you put your vision, you help everything form it, but ultimately it becomes director's vision, especially in the independent movie world. Now, if you are in the big studio, superhero movies, there's such a, or television, there's such a strict structure in place that the directors do pretty much what. But in the independent world, the directors it's really a director's vision. So I figured, okay, this one I want to follow it through all the way myself. Decided to direct the movie, and then I'm a kind of a history buff, so I've been fascinated by Harper's Ferry and John Brown. They've made movies about. I was also fascinated by slavery movies. I'm sure you've seen many of them, including 12 Years a Slave, directed by your fellow countrymen. Yeah. And one of the things I noticed in all these movies is that almost all of them, until very recently, they all dealt with the injustice, the torture, the misery of slavery. And I thought to myself, why, if I was a slave, I would spend 24 hours a day trying to figure out how to run away. Why didn't people do that? Then I realized hundreds of thousands of slaves actually attempted escape, and over 100,000 of them succeeded, and they ended up living in Canada, northern states, and everything. Yeah. So why don't we make a movie about that? Yeah. And so that's how and then we're doing research. We came across this life of Shields Green, which was never been told. And I want to say a story that never been told and wasn't on everybody's mind.
I was going to say that I've interviewed Cynthia Erivo for Harriet, which is another similar story, and she's British, obviously. And we don't really get taught. We get taught the basics of the Civil War, but we don't tend to get into the detail in this country. I felt guilty about that, and not knowing too much about Shields Green and his story, and even Harper's Ferry, really. Were you heavily sort of familiar with this before, or is it something you had to heavily research and then think about how you're going to put that spin on it that you clearly have?
Okay, I was quite familiar with Harper's Ferry and John Brown and Levi Coffin because, like I said, I'm a history buff. I'm not a historian. I read about these things. I was really, really fascinated by John Brown and Levi Coffin. These white people who actually really, really dedicated their life to fighting this, unjust and, basically inhumane, institution. In case of John Brown, it was his mission. He was willing to die from day one. And in fact, you probably know in part of history, he massacred some people in Kansas to prevent Kansas from becoming in fact, he's responsible for Kansas not becoming a slavery state, because at that point, every time a new state joined the Union, they would have a referendum whether they want to be allow slavery or not. And the southern states would send people to campaign for pro-slavery, but nobody was campaigning against slavery. They were just okay. And in fact, that's how Missouri, who's next to Kansas, had become a slavery state, even though they never got around practicing. So he said, I'm not going. He went to John Brown went to Kansas. People don't know that, into a little thing, and he basically massacred the entire contingent that had been sent from South to campaign for legalization of slavery. I mean, this is like how dedicated he was to this cause. It was so fascinating. So I knew about Harper's Ferry. But I didn't want to tell the Harper's Ferry story. I wanted to tell a escaped slave story. And we did research, and we found out, when we found so many, runaway slave stories. But what was so unique and interesting about Shields Green was that, first of all, he was this 23-year-old kid, literally, who ran away. Nobody knows about his journey from South Carolina to Pennsylvania, where he met Frederick Douglass and John Brown. But we do know he met Frederick Douglass, John Brown, and he took part in Harper's Ferry raid, which is really, really interesting. I mean, you've seen the movie. It's really a fascinating. It's just a story, great story by itself. 23 people take over a federal armory, and then they hoping to slaves to come. And then when a huge contingent of Marines comes, they don't give up. They decide to fight against the best, equipped and trained army of the time with 23 people, knowing they were all going to die. So that's fascinating. To me, what's so interesting was that Shields was like this common thread that put all these historical events together. In fact, I'm sure you've heard of Robert E. Lee. He became commander of the Southern forces. He was considered the Napoleon of the South. He was truly a military genius because he kept defeating the Northern forces with much smaller, number of troops and everything, and worse equipment. So now Robert E. Lee is in this movie, and in fact, he is accurate. John Brown, Levi Coffin, Frederick Douglass, which is like an icon of the American civil liberties. So to me, that story, when I saw all these things, and they were all connected with this young 23-year-old illiterate guy who ran away, and then ultimately where he decided not to, he could have gone. In fact, his conversation between Frederick Douglass, where he offers to send him to Canada, is historically accurate. And he decides, no, I'm going to go fight.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to spoil any of the ending or anything, but clearly it's a historical story. But you choose to sort of leave it on an upbeat kind of ending, really, which obviously his fate wasn't as uplifting as
happy as the movie.
But was that a decision you made early on, or is that kind of something you just sort of evolved over the sort of the period of you writing the script, really?
This is a really interesting question, because as we know, he was captured together with John Brown and hanged. Initially, we had a different ending where he jumps off that tower, falls in water, and we don't know what happened to him. So it would have left it at that. But we literally had, as we were shooting the movie, we had literally half of our crew were African Americans. And they said, look, Mark, every slavery movie has been made. They always, from Birth of a Nation to anything, they end up dying at the end. Yeah. He said the audience wants something inspirational. So we shot this alternate ending where he goes and saves his son. And ultimately, we decided that the message of the movie is more important than historical accuracy. It doesn't really matter whether he lived or died. What was, to me, the most important thing was that he escaped, he made it, and he made a choice to come back and fight. To me, that was the most critical thing. He made the choice to come back and fight, as opposed to go and live happily ever in Canada, which is what they all did at the time.
Yeah, he made a difference. And you've got a remarkable cast, actually. Screen veterans like James Cromwell and Bruce Dern, obviously. But you've got Dayo, who plays, I hope I pronounced that right, plays the lead as Shields. So how did you find him? Because it's very, very important that you get that right, because he's obviously in every scene pretty much.
Yeah. You know what is as typical in Hollywood, whenever you set out to make a movie, you're trying to get the most biggest name you can, best actors, biggest name you can in your movie. But being the first time director and the subject matter being tough subject. You know, we very quickly came to a conclusion that we are not going to get, you know, big name actors to do that. So then the choice was, okay, should we go for some secondary names or should we just go for the best possible actor? We ultimately made that decision to go, and we had an audition. We held an audition for literally a couple of months. We auditioned just about every, you know, actor that was interested, was enrolled, and you know, I mean, Dayo has already had experience. He'd been in some bigger movies like Hunger Games, and you know, and he'd done a lot, but on television series. But he was not a big name, but he was a seasoned actor. But ultimately, his auditions, he just knocked it out. He was so far better than anyone else, and he got the role. And also, he was so passionate about it. I remember one time he was living in New York at the time. We were just FaceTiming, and he just, his passion, his understanding of the story and everything. So we decided, okay, this is if you're going to go for the best possible actor, we can't find anybody better. And as it turned out, we were right. And by the way, that was our approach with most of the cast.
Yeah.
James Cromwell, he, you know, one of my producers knew, had worked with him. He read it. It's not like we didn't have the budget to pay people money to do it. Everyone who did, for everyone, this was a passion project. James Cromwell, Bruce Dern, Harry Lennox, who does amazing, Frederick Douglass, you know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you're producing alongside Reginald Hudlin, who I'm a big fan of actually, right the way back since House Party, and obviously more recently Marshall, which was fantastic. Obviously with Chadwick Boseman. He also produced Django Unchained, so obviously again we're going back to a similar sort of territory. What does he bring to the table as a co-producer, particularly on something like this kind of film?
Well, first of all, I mean, he came on board when the script was pretty much finished, and we were specifically, I mean, my co-writer Pat Charles is African American. Even though I knew a lot, I wanted to have some African American on board just to make sure we get everything right. And we sent it to many, you know, producers. And when Reggie responded to this, and we met, and he told me how much he loved the script, and it was great. And then, you know, of course, his track record and history. And what I liked about it, what Reggie was lucky was that he's not only a successful producer, but also a successful director. So to have, and it was your first directing job, it would be great to have a director as your producer. So he was really, really helpful. And I can tell you, he's definitely brought a lot to the table, help us make a great movie.
Just going away from the film slightly for a moment, we're obviously in the UK. We're still locked down. We're not allowed to leave our house at the moment. Cinemas are obviously still closed, which is great for movies like this. Which it's great to have seen them on the big screen, but we get to see them in our homes. We don't have to leave the house to do so. Just talking about the industry generally, and because you've been in the industry for many, many years, and you've done various different jobs throughout the industry. Your career spanned many different sectors. Just want to get your thoughts on what you thought about the situation and how things are at the moment, and how they're going to continue in terms of streaming and that sort of thing. Just what you think, really, the whole situation.
Well, it's so funny you put your finger on the issue, because we were scheduled to come out on 700 screens on April 20th, I think, of 2020, and the order came down to close all the cinemas literally on April 16th, and literally weekend before, the box office had been pretty normal, maybe off was 5 or 10%. It was nothing, and then it just happened so fast. And everybody thought, okay, this was going to be 3, 4, 5, 6 months. Then, as you can see, it's still continuing. Now they're beginning to open up. On a general note, for sure, it has changed the industry, this pandemic, and it will continue to change. Now, in some ways, you could say it accelerated a process that would have happened anyway, the transition to streaming, people watching movies at home. And people, one of the things, everybody talks about people watching movies at home, but one thing nobody talks about is if you go to any kind of electronic store, every time I go there, every 3-6 months, I'm amazed by the size of the screens and how cheaper they become.
Yeah, yeah.
A screen that 10 years ago you would have spent $10,000, you can buy it now for $1,000. I'm talking about a 70-inch screen. I mean, 70-inch or 80 inches.
It's pretty big.
You put that in a fairly small room, that's like a cinema. So the convergence of these two factors, convergence of streaming and the exploding size of the screens and the sound system and everything at extremely economical cost. I'm old enough to remember that first color TV back in the late 60s. I was a kid and I was fascinated by it. It was like $1,000 in 1969, $70. Do you remember how much money that was? And it was a small color TV. Now, look, for $1,000, you can buy a 78-inch screen, good sound, good picture, everything. So that, combine that with, the whole transition to streaming, the choice of stuff available. So I think that's going to continue. I don't think it's going to. However, I know for myself, and I know the experience of cinema, not only the giant screens of 300-inch as opposed to 70-inch or giant screen, but not only screen size, the surround sound, but also the collective communal experience. I think that's going to survive. For how long, I don't know. But I think after we come up, and I know there's so many people have pent up demand to go to cinemas, enjoy the experience of walking through the hallway, buying the popcorn, going sitting there with your friends, with your date or whatever. So I think it's going to continue. Do I think it's going to come back to the same level? Unfortunately, I don't think so. I think it's going to be continue, but at a reduced level.
Okay. And, you go back to yourself. So do you think you going forward, do you think you're still, I'm sure you'll still produce and all that sort of stuff, but do you think you'll continue to direct? Have you got the bug now to direct more, or is that it?
That's a really good question. First of all, I will continue to produce. We have several projects. We have a movie we just finished shooting in Albuquerque, New Mexico, kind of art house movie. Shirin Neshat was a big photography artist directing with Isabella Rossellini and Matt Dillon. I think we're trying to get into Cannes Film Festival this year. So yeah, we're going to continue. We have other projects going right now. We're working on TV series. So as far as a producer, yes. As far as a director, what I learned was that, and maybe it's because of my age or something, it was really, really tough. It was I'm sure you've been on movie sets and everything, directors. It's exhausting. And just the physical pressure. You're working literally 16 hours a day. I was going on 4 or 5 hours of sleep, and I have to get up every morning before I go to work to go for at least a little jog just to wake up or something like that. Do that. It was really exhausting, and we had only on this movie we had only a 28-day shoot. So, so if you ask me, am I in love with the act of directing? No. However, the satisfaction of seeing your vision come to life and people appreciate it and enjoy it and say, oh my God, this I really like, or I learned something. That satisfaction is so great that yes, I'm going to direct again, but I don't think I'll ever be a director who will just want to direct. It would have to be something that really, really touches my heart, and so it has to be a passion project for me to direct. I don't think I could ever be hired to do a superhero movie or something like that, although you never know.
Yes, absolutely. You've got credited as doing the new Zorro film. Is that something you're still attached to as a producer, or is that something that's not happening anymore?
Which one?
Zorro, the new Zorro.
Oh yeah. Zorro has been something that's been going on for years. We have the rights to make a futuristic Zorro. We share the rights with Sony Pictures. They have the right to make a historical one. We have the right to make a futuristic one. And we've come a couple of times very close to going to production, then things change as happens. And now we have a really good director, and we just got a really good script. So we are going out there to pitch it to studio. That has to be a fairly big budget movie. So yeah, we're still working on it.
Definitely want to see on a big screen as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, I wish you all the best with this. I'm sure it'll do well over here. I think it's a very accessible film, but with some good subject matter to really get engrossed in and take something away from. And I certainly took to the internet afterwards to do some more, delving into the story of Shields and everything else with the film. So thank you for that, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thanks for it.
Good to talk. Cheers.